There's this really common misconception floating around about credit cards that's stuck around for years. And honestly, it makes sense why people believe it. If you pay off your credit card balance in full every single month, you're told that you're not carrying any debt, that you're doing everything right, and that the credit card companies can't touch you. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets a little messy. There's actually a meaningful difference between not carrying a balance and not having debt, according to how credit scores work. And more importantly, according to how lenders look at you. Most people use these terms interchangeably, but they're really not the same thing at all. And understanding that difference can actually change the way you think about credit cards, whether they help or hurt your financial health, and how you should be using them in the first place. So, what exactly is the difference between a balance and utilization? How does one affect your credit and the other, well, not really? And finally, is there any scenario where paying in full actually matters less than people think? Let me start with what most people get right. When you pay your credit card bill in full by the due date, you avoid interest charges. That part is completely true, and it's actually the most important part. You're not paying the credit card company extra money in fees and charges, which is genuinely one of the best financial habits you can have. That's not the misconception. The misconception is that this automatically means you have zero debt in the eyes of the credit system. Because here's what actually happens. Even if you pay your bill in full, there's a snapshot moment that matters way more than most people realize. Credit card companies report your balance to the credit bureaus on a specific date each month, usually your statement closing date. So if you spend $3,000 on your card throughout the month and then you pay it all off a week before your due date, what gets reported to the credit bureaus is not a zero balance. What gets reported is $3,000. From a practical standpoint, you're not in debt. From a credit bureau standpoint, you absolutely are, according to the data they received. That's the gap right there. Your actual financial obligation is zero, but the information that goes into the credit system says otherwise. Now, does this actually matter for your credit score? Well, yeah, it does, but maybe not in the way you'd think. The thing is, most people don't realize that there's literally a difference between when you owe money and when you appear to owe money in the official system. Those are two separate things entirely, and they get treated differently by different parts of the financial infrastructure. Here's where credit utilization comes into play. Credit utilization is the percentage of your available credit that shows as being used on your statement closing date. So if you have a $5,000 credit limit and your statement shows a $3,000 balance, your utilization is 60%. Most credit scoring models, and we're talking about the ones that actually matter, like FICO scores, they definitely factor utilization into your score. It's around 10% of your total score weight, which honestly makes it pretty significant. The general guidance is that you want to keep your utilization below 30%, ideally even lower, because high utilization signals to lenders that you're relying heavily on credit, that you might be financially stressed, or that you could be risky if something goes wrong. Now here's the interesting part. If you pay your balance in full every single month, but you happen to have high spending on the statement closing date, your utilization will be high, and yes, that can slightly ding your credit score. But the ding is actually pretty small in most cases. And here's the thing that matters way more. You're still building credit history. You're still showing consistent on-time payments. You're still demonstrating that you're responsible with credit. So the utilization hit is real, but it's temporary and relatively minor compared to what's happening with the rest of your credit profile. Think about it this way. If you have 5 different credit cards and you're using all of them responsibly, paying them off each month, your on-time payment history is going to matter infinitely more than if one of them temporarily has higher utilization. That one factor is just not going to sink your score when everything else is working in your favor. But this is where it gets genuinely complicated, because there are different ways to interpret what debt actually means, and depending on your definition, the answer changes. If debt means money you owe right now that you're obligated to pay with interest, then paying in full means you have no debt, period. You're done. No argument. But if debt means information in your credit file that suggests you're using credit, then you absolutely have debt, according to the system, even if you pay in full. And that distinction matters because it changes how lenders evaluate you. A lender looking at your credit report sees that balance reported on your statement date. They don't necessarily know that you paid it off a week later. They see the snapshot. That's their information. So in a narrow technical sense, you don't owe them money. But in the broader sense of how you appear to the credit system, you're showing credit usage. It's like the difference between owing someone something versus appearing to owe them something based on the official record. Both can affect how people treat you, but they're operating on different timelines and different kinds of information. This matters especially when you're in the middle of a major financial event. If you're applying for a mortgage and a lender pulls your credit, they're looking at that snapshot from the statement closing date, not what you paid yesterday. So even though you're actively responsible about paying things off, there's this lag between your financial reality and what the official record shows. The record catches up eventually, but not immediately. Now, does this mean you should change how you use your credit card? Not really. Paying in full is still absolutely the right move, because avoiding interest charges is the biggest financial win you can get with a credit card. If you're paying in full, you're already ahead of probably 70% of credit card users. The utilization thing is almost a second-order concern, but where this gets actually useful is if you're trying to optimize your credit score for something specific, like applying for a mortgage or a big loan. If you know you're going to need credit soon and you care about your score being as high as possible, there are some tactics that make sense. You could pay your balance down before the statement closing date so that the reported utilization is lower. Or you could request a credit limit increase, which lowers your utilization ratio automatically without you changing your spending. Or you could just accept that your utilization might be a little higher because you're a normal person who spends money during the month. It depends on your priorities and your timeline. The key insight here is that you have more control over this than you might think. You're not just stuck with whatever balance happens to show up on your statement. You can actually strategically manage when and how much of your credit appears to be in use, even if you're paying it off in full every single month. That's a powerful tool that most people don't even realize they have. The real problem is when people conflate paying in full with having no relationship with credit at all, because that's not quite accurate either. When you use a credit card and pay in full, you're not debt-free in the credit system. You're actively using credit responsibly. That's actually better than being debt-free. It shows lenders that you can handle credit, that you pay on time, and that you're not panicking or avoiding credit altogether. Someone with no credit history is often seen as riskier than someone with good credit history, even if that history involves balances that got paid off. This is kind of counterintuitive to people, but it makes sense from a lender's perspective. If you've never borrowed money, they have no actual evidence that you'll pay it back. If you borrow money and pay it back consistently, that's proof. So the debt conversation is weird because it's really about perspective. From your wallet's perspective, if you pay in full, you have zero debt. From the credit bureau's perspective, you have reported usage that shows as a balance on a specific date. From a lender's perspective, you're someone who can handle credit responsibly and manage obligations. None of these are wrong, they're just different ways of measuring the same behavior through different lenses. What makes this more confusing is that the credit card industry, and honestly, the financial industry in general, uses language that makes this intentionally hard to pass. When a credit card company says you have a balance, they mean money you owe them that you're legally obligated to pay. When a credit bureau says you have a balance, they mean money that showed up on your statement on a specific date, regardless of whether you paid it the next day. When a lender says you have debt, they might mean either one depending on context, or they might even mean something slightly different, based on their own internal underwriting standards. So, understanding which definition is being used in which situation actually matters quite a bit. And most people just assume everyone's using the same definition, which they're not. That's why this myth has stuck around for so long. It's not because people are wrong exactly, it's because the terminology itself is ambiguous. And different parts of the financial system use it differently based on their own needs and timelines. The credit card companies need to track money you owe them for legal purposes. The credit bureaus need to track usage patterns for scoring purposes. The lenders need to understand risk for approval purposes. None of these are aligned, which is kind of a mess. So bottom line here, paying your credit card in full every month is genuinely one of the best financial moves you can make. It saves you massive amounts of money in interest. It protects you from debt spirals, and it builds credit history. The utilization that shows on your statement closing date, yeah, that exists, and it does get factored into your score, but it's a small part of a bigger picture. You shouldn't obsess over it, but you also shouldn't convince yourself that you have absolutely zero relationship with the credit system if you're using a credit card and paying it off. You absolutely do have a relationship with credit. You're just managing it well. That's the actual distinction. It's not between debt and no debt. It's between good credit management and bad credit management. And if you're paying in full, you're definitely in the first category, even if a balance shows up on your statement for a few weeks. If you want to dig deeper into how credit scores actually work and why they're weirdly important, even when you think you're doing everything right, we've actually made an entire video on that. You should be able to click that on your screen right now. Thanks for watching, mate. Bye.